So next midfielder.
So we go
this is
wide men, or we go in the one in the hole? What do you want to do?
well. Which side do you put yourself, Kieron?
I'll put myself on the right. The dreaded
on
right.
the left, so we're right there.
Yeah.
All right, let's go with you. Yeah, go on then. Where you go?
I'll put myself on the right, especially playing 4-3-3. You're not playing as a right midfielder. You're basically a right attacker. You can go into pockets. You can use your penetration. I didn't like playing on the right in a 4-4-2 as much, but I've played wide in a 4-3-3 many a times. I don't like talking about myself, to be honest, like this.
Well, let me do it then. There was always, when we were younger as kids, and we came through similar sort of age groups and played in the under 21s together. And there were certain players that I knew that were absolute quality, whether they played for. I played with, obviously, Scully was part of that as well. It was a big Ipswich one, but I look back to those days and we beat Italy away in Italy, and there was you playing. I think I set you up that day for the goal as well. We talked about that a little while ago. Rio Ferdinand playing. There were certain players I thought that would make a difference in our team when they were playing at that level, and you were one of them. Without a doubt, it's one of those people that when I was playing at Norwich, and I tried not to look at Ipswich too much. You were the player that I'd watch, because the ability you had to go past people and score goals and excite people, and that for me is what a wide man has to do, or that's what an attacker has to do. They have to excite people. They have to have pace. They have to be able to score goals, and you're a horrible on the pitch as well at times. But that's what every single top player has to have to reach that very, very, very top level. You've got to have everything. And for me, as much as it hurts me to say it about an Ipswich Town player, I'll take it away from the Ipswich Town side. I'll talk about when you play for Newcastle and that. I feel a bit easier then. One of the best players I've seen of that era, and it was an absolute pleasure to be part of that squad with you at the time. So that's you. In terms of the players I'm going to put up against you, right midfielder, there's probably one that stands out, and I'm sure you'll know who I'm going to say. And he's actually from Ipswich himself. So still lives there. Came to Norwich as a youngster, and that's Rule Fox. I mean, Rule Fox had just ability beyond belief, and he went on from Norwich to go to Tottenham. He went to Newcastle. So I think the sort of path as you took, Kieron. But he was just, when I was coming through the youth team and watching the first team play, he was the player that I modelled myself on and wanted to be in the first team. We all looked at the team you wanted to join and play for, and how you wanted to play and how you wanted to be like. And he was the one for me. Rule Fox was just a goal scorer. He could set things up, and he was horrible on the pitch as well, but a great lad off it. So looking at the two, look, Foxy was outstanding. He was to say, probably one of Norwich's greatest ever wingers. But I have to put my hands up and say, look, Kieron was a better player. Foxy probably openly admit that as well.
We played similar paths. We've only just retired from Vets football. We played for Whit and Vets together. Me, Foxy, and all that. Yeah, he's such a great
lad. Such a great lad. He has. And that for me is, I have to, again, you look at the England side and you look at all that type of thing. You have to roll it into one. And as good as Foxy was in that era, I think if I looked at someone I thought is going to be from my era who was going to surpass that and be better, who was coming through, was Kieron. So I'm going to have to concede, unfortunately, on Rule Fox for Kieron Dyer.
You won't have it that easier on the left-hand side, I'll tell you that.
Fine, I don't care. All right.
But Darren, just picking up, you said that Kieron was a horrible something or whatever on the pitch. What does that mean as a fan? What's he getting up to that makes you think that he's horrible?
He wasn't horrible in terms of, he wasn't like a Tarico horrible. He wouldn't do that. But what he was he would put his foot in. He would like everything would go into his performance. I think Kieron was a bit like me when I played. I don't understand the generation where people talk about players who have tossed it off in a game or I'm not quite at it, or you don't fancy it. I didn't care whether I was playing in a five-a-side with my mates, if I was playing for Norwich, I was playing for England, I was playing for whoever. I wanted to be the best for me. And I think ultimately that's what sets players apart. And Kieron had that. It wasn't about anybody else. It was about Kieron Dyer being the best he could be. And the rest of it would take care of itself. And he had that single-mindedness to succeed and go on. And you know, to watch him play and at Ipswich, it's always a matter of time before he's going to go on to bigger and better things. So you can see that quite early. And you know, from a youngster coming into the team, his drive and determination, and to fit into a team, an experienced team like he did, and show that quality right from the start is very, very hard to do. You can see it now with the players trying to break in now. Not very often do you see 17, 18-year-old lad breaking into a first team. They're generally 21, 22 now before they get an opportunity. So you've got to be that good. You've got to be that good in an era where people were there to hurt you. For the type of player that Kieron was and I was, people were there to break you. You know, numerous team talks I heard of managers saying, fucking get stuck into him early on, smash him, because if you don't let him know, you're going to be out. But then Kieron was like me. I relished that. I loved the fact that someone was going to try and boot me. It used to drive me on even more to make him look like a twat, because it was just what I wanted to do for me first and foremost. And I think that's the most important part. And it's not being selfish. I think we sometimes in England sort of mistake self-confidence for being big-headed. And I think people would see that. But Kieron was single-minded to succeed, to be the best he could be for him. And everything else will then take care of itself around him.
Good point. You know, when you said Raw Fox, I thought it was going to be a bit more difficult than it was. But I think you were a bit too polite for Kieron. Raw Fox was a great player, Kieron, and you know,
he was brilliant.
Had a great career as well. He's absolutely idolised at Newcastle.
Yeah,
very good for Tottenham, and like you said, he's one of the best wingers Norwich have ever produced. It's a shame just let him through their fingers. I can't understand how an Ipswich boy ends up at Norwich.
I think with looking at the 7 players on the team sheet, some people are probably thinking that you've earned it, but when they find out that Raw Fox is possibly on the bench, not even in the squad, they're going to think, well, there could be a challenge there. But I'm interested on this. I think
as well, just on the right hand side as well. Kieron was a slightly different player to Foxy. Kieron was more graceful with the ball, more technically gifted in terms of skills, and Foxy was out and out blistering pace and power, and I think that's slightly different to what Kieron was. But if I look at players I like to watch them both. But as I say, I have to balance it on, again, where their career level reach. And I think Kieron just reached the heights above where Foxy did. But I mean, it's so close between the two in terms of their club career. But Kieron was obviously involved with England. So that, for me, takes the biscuit over Foxy.
Let's go to the left wing, yeah.
I obviously went, especially in a 4-3-3. I think this formation is made for him. Bobby Petter. Ipswich fans were probably like, when is the real Bobby Petter going to turn up? And then that one season, didn't he turn up and he was absolutely unstoppable. Obviously, he scores the 2 goals against Norwich in that 5-0 demolition, which is probably the highlight of my Ipswich career. Intelligent. Didn't just beat people with pace and trickery. He could play 1-2s. Like I said, for a winger to be unplayable for probably 6 months of that season it was a joy it was baffling because we didn't know where it come from, because he'd been at the club probably about 18 months prior to that. But he was, when we went on that run to make the playoffs and nearly get promoted automatically, he was a massive part to playing it. Obviously, he went to Celtic, didn't he? He left us on a free, went to Celtic. He did well for Celtic as well. So
anyone could do well for Celtic.
Yeah. Chris Sutton didn't.
Steve Guppy. Yeah, Steve Guppy went from Leicester to Celtic and was a ledge. I mean, come on, you got to do me a favour now.
Bobby was very, very good. Probably an icon of our club. But then if you're going to put yourself left wing, again, touching on basically what you said about me, not many people know this story. I'm really close to Pete Taylor, and people don't realise how loved Darren was by Glenn Hoddle. Glenn Hoddle was going to obviously always fast track Rio, myself, Richard Wright, Emil Heskey, Darren Eadie, and then obviously Lee Hendry later. So they were always fast tracking him to be in the England squad sooner rather than later. My first derby was at Carrow Road. We lost 2-1 on the day. You basically had a free roll off the striker. You ripped us. I think you won the man of the match that day. You were the difference in the game. Blistering pace. Scared us. I can remember I weren't quite in that year when poor John Walk towards the end was playing centre half against him as well. So yeah.
But he got sent off.
Listen, you know you're a good player when Ipswich fans, they label you as the bad guy. As soon as you got the ball, you got booed. They knew you were the danger. They're not stupid people. They're well-educated people. Like I said, in that England under-21 team, there was one stage where we had 5 or 6 of us from Ipswich and Norwich, which is mind-boggling the way you think of football today, and it's all Man City and Chelsea and Liverpool. We were doing something right, and you were a very, very, very good player. And like I said, one thing that gets labelled at me quite a bit is injuries. And what if I didn't have injuries? And that's probably even for you, even more, because your injuries hit you a lot sooner than it did me. He's touched on that. We played a certain amount of Premier League games. I'm sure we'd have played well over 300, 400 games in the Premier League if our bodies didn't betray us. And that's a testament to your ability. And yeah, you're a good player. And when we got to see you live and playing with you, you're a dream to play with. So yeah, Bobby Pett's got no chance. I think even the Ipswich fans, even they watch this back, if they're being honest and they're putting their blue blood aside, they know you are our nemesis. So that's,
yeah. I like Bobby.
Yeah,
I like Bobby, but he wasn't consistent. And you're right. You know, as a fan travelling up to Carrow Road, or when we were entertaining Norwich at Portman Road, you'd always be a player, certainly in the 90s, that the one that we think that we'd have to watch. I thought Wright, you should have done a bit better for the goal that you scored at Carrow Road. I think you rushed out a bit too much, but you managed to stick it in from a great angle. And unfortunately, you were just too fast for John Walk. I think it was really unfair that booking that sending off that you had. But yeah, I've got to say that you were a player. And I'm looking at the squad for that game, that 5-0 demolition derby, and your name just does stand out by a long way. And I think you probably earned that. You probably come off at half time. We'll bring Bobby Petter on as one of the subs. But yeah, I think we'd put you in as left wing.
I thought like Kieron said, do you know what? Them days, those Ipswich derbies, you do the Ipswich Norwich derby. You lifted yourself for it. It was just I used to love them from a month building up to the games, and the hostility of it all. I loved it all, and I think, as saying to Kieron, if you can't enjoy that as a footballer, you're never going to succeed. I wanted to beat Ipswich with a passion, and I'm sure Kieron was the same, wanting to beat Norwich. It was just in you to do it. And, some of the atmospheres we had were incredible. Some of the best I've played in. I remember when the Gunny kick won down at Ipswich Town, and all the fans were on the pitch after the game. And I believe it was Jason Dezell's brother, who's quite well known in Ipswich for being a bit of a wrong. And he was coming on a pitch and slapping us all. We're talking about like pitch invasions at the moment. It's been quite a hot topic, of course. And yeah, we were walking off the pitch and somebody smacks me on the back of the head. And he goes to smack somebody else on the back of the head. It was, but I loved it. I never felt threatened by it all. I used to thrive on it. I used to love that challenge of being booed and being cajoled by the opposition. Because as Kieron said, you're doing something right. If they want to dig you out, it's because you're doing well. And I use that as an incentive. So yeah, look, it's nice to hear those things that Kieron said about Glenn Hoddle and things. And it's just, yeah, my career was cut short at 28. I was in the England squad a few times, the Glenn Hoddle, as was Kieron, and that, like you said, 4 or 5 players from our squad that were fast-tracked. So it was a pleasure to be part of that era, but, you know, terribly gutting to have it cut short. But, you know, life happens, as Kieron knows, and things come along, you have to deal with it, and you try and get over it as best you can. But it's always sticks in my mind of being a really tough time in terms of the injuries, as we've both experienced. So, but you know, how many years we are now? 25 years later, and people are still talking about us. We must have done something right.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. The only name, Kieron, that I'm just looking at this list that you didn't mention as a centre mid was Danny Sonner, often underrated by Ipswich Town players. Scored at Carrow Road as well in the. Darren's not keen.
What? Do me a favour. You mentioned that's even pointless mentioning those names. What are you doing?
Danny Sonner.
Oh my word.
Is synonymous with, what was that nightclub called? Chicago's or something?
Chicago's,
like yeah.
That's why everyone knows Danny Sonner. Yeah.
So to be fair, a lot of your boys used to come up and go out in Norwich, didn't they? So Titus and his brother used to come up to Norwich all the time to go out.
All the time.
They were always up here.
All the time.
Good old days, eh?
See, Ipswich players can go to Norwich and not be having to work. Norwich players
I couldn't go the way around. Yeah. Although, I mean, look at the size of Titus. No one was going to pick on him, were they? That was the difference. You know, he could do what he wants wherever he wants.
I couldn't imagine Robert Fleck walking around Hollywoods or something like that. That would really. I think you played with him. With his second spell at Carrow Road, you were playing with Flecky.
Yeah,
I can't believe I called him Flecky. What the hell is that for?
Yeah, he was a crowd pleaser. As much as he was a great striker back in the day, don't get me wrong, but his second spell at Norwich, he wasn't the player he used to be because he was a bit older. But again, in terms of someone who read the game really well and taught us the way of playing, he was a great lad. But he had one trick at half time. Now I always couldn't work out why he used to do it. So we come in for half time, have a team talk. He would always strip down completely bollock naked, take his top off, shirt off, everything, pull his shorts and his pants down, right down by his ankles, and sit on the edge of the bench with his cock and balls just hanging down. And he would do it on purpose because then the manager couldn't have bollock him and have a go at him and look at him because he's literally sitting like that. And I spoke to him when I said, "Is that what do you do that for?" He said, "Well, for that exact reason." I said, I'm trying to cool down, but also I know the manager can't take me seriously if I'm sat there with all my gear hanging out. Yeah, good lad, Flecky.
Different tactic. We've still got one space in midfield, and we'll come back to that one. So we've got two more players left to pick. We'll start with one from you, Darren, and then we'll go one from you, Kieron, and we'll decide on that way. Okay.
Well, if you're going to go to 4-4-2, if we do the same, so I'll mention both my forwards, the 9 and the 10, or the two front men. I kind of been a bit 90s. I kind of love a bit of classic big man, little man. And there's two players who I played with that actually quite early on in their careers, both of them at different times, who went on to bigger and better things.
Oh no, Jesus Christ.
So
you can't be putting Craig Bellamy in, Jesus Christ.
The first one is Chris Sutton. Chris Sutton was obviously went on to Blackburn, won the Premier League, is involved with England. I think anybody
went to Blackburn and Shearer won the Premier League. Sorry, must say.
He was part of the SAS for the Sutton and Shearer brigade.
There was no SAS.
Won the Premier League.
The Shearer.
Sutty was for me. He was like he could play anywhere. He used to play central defence as well for Norwich at times, but he was probably the best centre forward I played with in terms of. He was a tramp though. He was my first roomie, so he was literally his gear he used to wear was shit. He used to look like a tramp, and he was my first roomie. But he was some players. Laces always had done in training. He was the one that would always get Donkey of the Week in training as well. So he'd always have the yellow jersey on because he was so shit in training. But come a Saturday, he played in Norwich's first team for 2 or 3 seasons, and he was why Norwich essentially finished third in the Premier League because of him and because of the ability he had. He was just a great target man, scored goals, and again he was horrible on the pitch. He was one of those lads that he was good mates with Foxy and he was good mates with Lee Power, and they just had something going in that era. And so he was another one that kind of come off the conveyor belt for Norwich's youth team as well, a local boy. So, you know, an iconic person for Norwich. Left Norwich under a bit of a cloud when he had a fight with someone out in the club and bit a taxi driver's finger or something like that. And it was all sorts of stuff going on. But certainly was that classic centre forward of the 90s. And to say, to win the Premier League, he has to be in the team. I think anybody who's got a winner's medal in the Premier League and consistently played the whole season for a Premier League winner's medal, for me, has to be in the team. My other one, and I know Kieron's going to hate it. And you know what? The weird thing is, I fucking hate him as well. But it is Craig Bellamy. It is Craig Bellamy. I mean, I don't know Bellas now, so I can only speak from my time of playing with Bellas at Norwich. He was just a horrible little shit. But we talk about that single-mindedness of
he says the same about you, by the way.
Yeah, he probably does. But you know, he was just like everybody else's shit apart from him. You know, he was just so single-minded to be the best, and he hated the fact that I was a talisman at Norwich. He hated it with a passion, and he would have moved on from Norwich to bigger and better things at the time. He was going to go to Spurs, but he actually played, I think it was a pre-season friendly against Southend. He wasn't supposed to play, and he said to Bruce Rioch, "Just let me have half a game. Just let me play half a game." And he snapped his cruciate in that half, so it set him back a couple of years. But just horrible. I mean, I've had run-ins with him on nights out because he's just digging at you the whole time, telling everybody they're shit and he's the best thing in the world. And he then moves on and obviously went to Cov, but he played for Newcastle, for Liverpool, for Man City. And as a player, I can't deny the fact he was just fantastic. And as someone who was the talisman in the Norwich team, looking at someone behind me thinking, fuck, I've got to watch my back here, it was Craig Bellamy. So as much as I hated him as a person, I loved him as a player. And he did go on and prove that worth, I think. I think he was just a top quality player who, if didn't get injured, obviously played for Wales as well. You know, it's no England, get me wrong, but he was just a sensational player. It was hard for me to do it, but I'm just going on pure football ability. If I want someone in my team, I want Craig Bellamy in it because he was horrible on the pitch as well, and he'd score goals and he was creative. He was just that type of player. Off the pitch, didn't want anything to do with him. And I'm sure Kieron's got lots of stories about him as well. But some of the stories I heard when he was at Newcastle about telling Bobby Robson he was shit and stuff. And it's like, and I know Shearer had tore him up in the changing rooms and stuff. And you just think, well, Bellas, what are you doing? You've got nothing to prove. Just keep your gob shut and let your football do the talking. But for me, that is what made him so good, because he was an arsehole on and off the pitch. And he was so single-minded to be the best, better than everybody else. Whether he was or wasn't, he would believe he is. And that's why he had the career he did, because he was just horrible. Just a nasty little horrible shit.
Yeah.
That's my two, Chris Sutton and Craig Bellamy.
Moralise me that as them two strikers. By the way, we're getting into this debate. I'm not even going to mention my two strikers, but you did say, when I said about Bobby Petter going to Celtic, you said anyone goes to Celtic.
Bellas went there as well. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm talking about Chris Sutton. He spent about 6 years in his prime going to Celtic, by the way. Just want to throw that in before I go to my strikers.
But he did also play for Chelsea. I know he had one, but he did also play for Chelsea.
I wouldn't say play for Chelsea, would you? Would you say play for Chelsea? He'd score a goal for like 30 games.
He was, I think he was the record signing for Chelsea at the time.
He was.
That's as good as he gets. Yeah. So he obviously had something about him. So they're my two, Chris Sutton and Craig Bellamy.
Can I just jump in? And Celtic's not a graveyard for footballers. They qualify for the Champions League.
I didn't bring this up. I like Ray.
It depends who you are. There's some absolutely brilliant players that have gone to Celtic over the years. Don't get me wrong, but I can't class Bobby Petter as one of them. As decent as he was, he's not. He's a decent player, but I don't class him as a. Henrik Larsson. Now you're talking. There's some players there. Petrov, and fantastic player. And there's been a few over the years, but it's also been mixed in with some players that are decent. But I think if you're a quality player, you'd always succeed. But I think there's been some players that were decent that went to Celtic, and it furthered their career for a bit longer than it probably would have done if they were playing south of the border. My opinion.
What about players that came from Celtic to south of the border. South of the border. You mentioned Malky Mackay, Peter Grant. Was that a step up for them from Celtic to Norwich, or a step down?
Well, it depends when they came, because Peter Grant come to the end of his career, the back end of his career. So he was about 95 when he came to us. He had everything you need in terms of his knowledge and experience to gauge from the lads, and we learned a lot from that. But he certainly wasn't the player he was at Celtic, and as a legend he was. And Malky was the same. Malky was, I think, probably suited better to the Scottish game, and I think he excelled at that. I think he was a good player for us, but I would say he was certainly good for Celtic, but I don't think he would ever reach those heights in the Premier League. Look, probably if you're going to compare Premier League to Celtic, that not many of those Celtic players that he played with would get in the top 6 of a Premier League team, and that's why I sort of class Malky. Malky was a fantastic player for Norwich, great captain, great leader. When they won the league and stuff, he was brilliant. He was brilliant, but he wasn't a top Premier League player, or even a mid-table Premier League player, in my opinion. So difficult to fit him in, really.
I agree. I can't believe I'm sticking up for Chris Sutton here, but I'm sticking up for him after his time at Norwich. The SAS strike force, Kieron, it was the SAS, it was Sheeran and Sutton, and I know that you're kind of with your big friend Alan Shearer, but I think you're doing Sutton a little bit of a disservice there.
I'm trying my hardest to get him out of the team.
I just thought you were going to mention
Wright Bellamy is a lock in the team. I know he's one of my best mates in football, but
God, people are going to hate.
No one who I played with at Ipswich cannot play in front of Craig Bellamy. I'm sorry.
So tell us.
So I've gone for. So
is this going to make me laugh? Am I going to giggle now? Is this like my centre half partnership? Is this going to be your...
No.
Okay, all right, okay.
Ipswich Town legend. Played in the Premier League probably most of his career. So I've gone for the one off the striker. I could have put Jimmy Bullard as a number 10 there. I played with him when I came back into loan, but no. I've gone for playing in the hole, Jason Dazelle.
Right.
Played with him when he came back to Ipswich, his second spell. Again, what a player. So intelligent, great touch. I think his stats back up, the youngest player to ever score in the top division at the time. Then he scored for Ipswich Town on the Saturday, went to school, high school on the Monday. That's how it's just unheard of. Which you were talking about, young kids now have to be 21 probably to get into the first team. He's just turned 16. He's still at high school. So I went for Jason Dazelle, went on at Tottenham, had a good career at Tottenham, scored massive goals for Ipswich against Norwich. He's in our top 10 goal scorers of all time at Ipswich as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
Must be in the top 10 for appearance makers for Ipswich as well. He's a real legend of the club. And I could have also put Scoey there, or Scoey up top.
No!
I could have.
No, I can't have Scoey. I can't have the count. We can't have the count in that team. No, I can't have it.
I had to go for David Johnson. Again, we were really struggling. One season, we were in the bottom half of the table. We signed this kid from Bury. Again, never heard of him. I remember his debut at Molineux. He scores. He was on an absolute fire, and he scored probably for the 2 seasons I was there, 25 plus goals a season. The following season when I left, when they got promoted, him and Marcus Stewart scored bags of goals as well. I'm just deflated because my debate, how much I love Jono. There's no way Jono can play in front of Chris Sutton and Craig Bellamy. It's just, can I get Jason Dazelle in there? But if we're talking about what these players have gone on to achieve in their careers.
This is looking like a horrible team now. God,
yeah.
I would absolutely hate this team. Well, half of them anyhow. But yeah, I think there's a couple of things I want to pick up. Why, Darren, why did you call Scoey the Count?
Because he's the most late. Well, Well, he used to just kind of, he used to just kind of ghost around it. So Scully was when Kieron mentioned Peter Taylor earlier when we were in England under 21s together, and he's turn up, and that's back in the day when actually you'd have a roomie. Nowadays you'll have a room each, but he said, I've sorted your roomie out for you because he picked the rooms for you. And bearing in mind, I think we just played in a derby a couple of weeks before, and I'd never met Scully before in my life. He put me in a room with him. So first of all, we did that. I mean, the Ipswich Norwich thing. So I met Scully, but then Scully came to my stag do. I've known Scully for many years. He's a great lad, but do you know what his nickname was at Leicester when he went to Leicester? His nickname at Leicester was the Weirdo. Because he was just a strange lad. You'd be talking, you know what, Kieron knows what he's like. You start talking to Scully, you'd have a conversation with Scully, and all of a sudden he'll just look away and walk off and disappear for like an hour, and you haven't a clue where he's gone. He was just a strange man. He was just a strange boy. So be it the count, because he was just sort of ghost around everywhere, sort of one paced, just not all taken in, very quiet, just sort of come out with the odd little thing every now and again. But yeah, just he's great lad, Scary. I love Scary. Yeah, he's one of my roomies under 21.
When you room with him, was he still like obsessed with, like, you know, when the TV's off and it's got the standby light on, and every single
he had to cover it up.
The clock had to be covered. The digital clock, you couldn't have any kind of light coming through.
Yeah, he's a weirdo. That's what I'm saying. The perfect nickname. Yeah.
He was a good player, though. He was. I say about Scully, he was very underrated, a bit like Emil Heskey. He did a lot of the donkey work and probably didn't have the production and the goals that
Scully is one of those players, though, if you remember, anywhere near Christmas, all of a sudden Scully would become a bit of a nightmare on the pitch and get sent off because he would never be playing over Christmas or Boxing Day. He would time his bookings and his sending offs perfectly. So he'd have the Christmas off.
We'll check that out now.
Yeah, let's check that, yeah. I love that.
Yeah, I can't argue. I would love to get Jason Dezelle in the team, but
I've got a question about Jason Dezelle. Would he not be a bad influence on you? He came back. He's second time, and he didn't play for the club 4 games or whatever before his contract wasn't renewed, and he was out drinking with you. I think that was the rumor.
That's complete and utter bullshit.
Rumor.
The game was Charlton away. I came off with a virus. He came off with a virus. And then he was seen spotted going to a party, a function. I was nowhere near there. And then when his contract wasn't renewed, the big rumor was he was a bad influence on me. But that's absolutely nonsense. He was a good influence on me because I needed more people like that who have been there, done it, made mistakes, which I hadn't made mistakes at the time. And I hated that was labelled at him, that he was a bad influence on me, because I see him as an actual role model. And he was a very good player even when he came back, by the way.
Well, what's he going to say?
Actually, on Doss, so just at Doss as well, I worked with him a little bit when I came down to work in a school in Ipswich at St Joe's College for a while, running the football programme there, and he used to come in and do some coaching. And Doss is probably the one player I've met from Ipswich over the years. He literally, sometimes he couldn't look at me because I played for Norwich. I think he still hated me. Yeah. And he had it in him. He hated anything to do with Norwich. He hated it with a passion. Whereas I can kind of, you know, there's always going to be that rivalry there. But I think all these years later, he still literally didn't want to work with me. Didn't want to have anything to do with me. I think he found it really hard, really difficult.
Another Ipswich and bread.
Yeah, exactly. But how are you going to face him, Kieron, when you next see him and say that you didn't get him into an Ipswich team, but you did agree that Chris Sutton and Craig Bellamy could go in ahead of him?
Well, it's only because I'm putting him up against Craig Bellamy. And at the end of the day, Craig Bellamy's played Champions League. He's won the PFA Young Player of the Year. He's played for Liverpool, Man City. He's played for top teams. He was a top player. Obviously, Darren talked about Craig and teammates wanted to beat him up. And the one thing I always say about Craig is he never asked a teammate to do something that he wasn't willing to do. So if he'd dig someone out for not eating the right food, he was actually eating the right food, so he'd dig them out, or they weren't training the right way, he'd be the one who was given 100% in training, whether it be in the gym. So he was very demanding. And like you said, I remember I hated him when we used to play against him in the youth team. In even the game I touched on, Darren, my first derby, my first start in the derby, he's sub. I talk about it all the time. He's sub. I'm playing right back against Adrian Forbes. I'm having a good game. We're losing 2-1. He comes on. He comes straight running over to me. He's not even playing against me. He just runs 50 yards where he's not meant to be. And he goes, "You're shit." And I'm like, "Hang on a minute. You're sub. I'm shit, but you're sub for Norwich." That's
unbelievable.
Just the way he tried to get under the skin of people. And it was like, I always say that players like that, they need to have that edge though. Because when Graham Souness came into Newcastle and was meant to sort out the brat pack and this and that, Craig went within himself and he didn't have that edge anymore because he knew that once he stepped out, Souness wanted to rip his head off, and you just lost the player. So some of these players, you got to let them play on the edge. You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got Sutton and Bellamy, but that means we've got Jim Magilton.
On that, I'll give you Jim. On that
Thank
note,
you.
I think it's only fair. But in diplomatic relations over the border, cross-border, and all that, do him a bit for diplomatic relations. I'll give you that.
I think it's only
manager.
Fair. Yeah, well, I was going to say the man. Well, should we go for the subs first of all? Should we? Ian Crook's got to be a sub. We'll go with 3 outfield players from that. The players that
I'd probably, from my side, I'd probably go in terms of the ones I'd put forward as a sub: Rule Fox, Ian Crook, and probably Mark Bowen. If we're going to have 3 subs, they were the 3 I'd put forward from my side.
Your ones that missed out were Mickey Stockwell, Kieron, Titus, Bobby Petter, and then I got a bit lost. You kept naming lots of town strikers to try and grasp one that would be better, but I think you named Dazelle,
David Johnson,
Scoey, David Johnson. Yeah.
I didn't even mention Efan Akuku, and I played with him. He was unbelievably good Efan as well that era. And he scored 4 at Everton in the Premier League as well. Just great. But he's only with us for long, season or so. Then he moved on. But he was a great player too.
To all the Ipswich and Norwich fans, if you are watching this, by the way, Darren has got a longer period to pick from. I was only at Ipswich for 2.5 years, so
this is very true. Although I've only picked him basically from the first 2 or 3 years of my career, because the rest after that we were in the Championship and it wasn't as good. So yeah, we had to. I went early doors.
What about he wasn't on par with you, but what about Keith O'Neill?
Keith O'Neill used to think he was the Georgie Best of Norwich. That's what he used to think he was. He was a great. Yeah, I mean, he got injured a lot. He went on from Norwich to Middlesbrough, I think he did, and played a few bits and bobs. But great player. Another one off the pitch that had that edge like Bellis did. You know, people didn't like him as a kid because he was self-confident. Great player. But I always remember the one thing people always ask the story about Keith O'Neill. He went on Soccer AM. And they said to him on Soccer AM, we always used to go on there back in the day, didn't we? When they said to him, "What's the best thing about Norwich?" And he said the A11 to London. So he was never forgiven by Norwich fans after that. But he was a bit like a George Best. He used to love a night out, love the drink. He was just but his body used to break a lot on him as well, unfortunately.
He couldn't even get that answer right. He should have said the A120 back to Ipswich, but never mind.
In the starting 11, there are 6 town players and five Norwich players. So with the 3 subs, we'll go with 1 town player and 2 Norwich players to even it up. And you don't have to do it like that. You have to even it up if you think it's right. It's right. You know? Well, Ian Crook.
At the end of the day, it's your podcast. It's your podcast. It's an Ipswich podcast. So there's always going to be a bit heavy the other way, won't
it? Ian Crook, I think, gets in there. Looking at the other players that missed out, Jono should be in there. I'm ruling out Jason Dazelle, not because of that incident or the fact the incident happened, but you only played with him a little bit in that short time. And the one player out of all of those that really sticks out to me as being a really decent player. And if we're going to ignore the centre halves, I thought Matt Jackson was pretty decent for Norwich, but I would probably go with Raul Fox as the third sub. And then we're kind of quite happy there because he was born in Ipswich and played for Norwich and still plays a little bit for Witten. But then we come to the, we've got our 11, we've got our three subs, but we now need to decide who's going to manage it. And then I looked, and forget what I said about people being temporarily in charge, temporarily being involved. But I think you've got a couple of decent managers north of the border. But Kieron, you've got George. Do you want to come into bat for him and say what he was like? I've got your book over here. I'm not going to read it, but there is a line in there when you said that George Burley didn't develop me, and I was quite interested what you meant by that.
I think Darren can vouch for this, is that when you're in a youth setup, it is about individual development. And then when you get into the first team, especially back in the 90s, I thought it was just all about the team, 5-a-sides, crossing and finishing, but it was never that individual. What is your weaknesses? How are we going to develop your weaknesses? So when I said that George gets a lot of credit, yes, he should get a lot of credit because he gave me my debut and he wasn't shy in giving kids a chance. And it's not just at Ipswich, all the players he gave at Southampton, Lallana's and Gareth's and Theo's and Huddleston at Derby. He gave everyone their chance, and that takes a lot of courage for a manager to do that. But I'm talking about as an actual develop me as an individual player. I always give Brian Klug and Paul Goddard and all my youth coaches the benefit of the doubt on that side, because they worked on my weaknesses, made my strengths super strengths and weaknesses, because that's what their jobs are. His jobs is to win matches on a Saturday. It's not to just focus on Kieron Dyer every day, because we've got to prepare to play Norwich at Carrow Road in 2 days' time, if you know what I mean. So again, where people read that, they might think I have a issue with George Burley. I've got no issue with George Burley. I'm forever grateful, and he is a fantastic manager. Darren's going down this course of hopefully being a manager or a coach, and I don't think he was an unbelievable coach, but as a manager and managing people, and his recruitment was first class. And like I said, to take Ipswich, that's like Daniel Farke taking Norwich up in the Premier League when it was, we had the Invincibles at the time and Man United with the Wright Keens. And to go into the last game of the season with a chance of qualifying for the Champions League and then to win Manager of the Year is testament to George. And yeah, he was a fantastic manager. But Ipswich have got a very uncanny knack of producing good managers.
So we put George Burley down then, unless you want to come in, Darren.
He can't say Mike Walker.
Mike Walker. Well, the thing is that you look again. So there was two managers that really, one that they were very 90s managers as well. And we talk about, as Kieron just said there, they're both managers that I played under for Norwich, that I was caught in toying between, were very similar managers in a way that they man managed. They were good man managers. They didn't coach. The first one, Martin O'Neill. Martin O'Neill never would come out and coach. You wouldn't see him till a Friday, but you'd have your coaches in the background that did all the work for you and worked with you every single day, that developed your game and produced you from that. So Martin O'Neill wasn't, but he was such a great motivator and studied psychology. We all know well about Martin O'Neill in terms of his man management, and that got the best out of me as a player. I wasn't a player that wanted a manager on the training pitch every single day, because I didn't want to keep hearing his voice. I'd like to have a manager come in at a weekend or on a Friday, and all of a sudden the gaffer's here would liven me up for the game. Managers are very different now. They're out on the pitches all the time, and you're hearing the voice. And I'm not sure how, as a player, that would get the best out of me. I think I'd switch off after a while. So for me, and as Kieron just said, Mike Walker was another one where he progressed my game from. He was the reserve team manager when I was in the youth team and I played in the reserves. He then got his opportunity in the Norwich first team to be the manager, took over from Dave Stringer, who basically developed that squad, which then went on to have the success it did. But he gave me my opportunity at 18 years of age in the club's first ever game in Europe. You know, he chucked me on with 20 minutes to go. And it's just the confidence he gave in me to be able to do that. But again, he was a great man manager. He'd be on the coach drinking with the boys, fighting with them at the back of the coach, arm wrestling with them. He's one of those type of managers. But the quality in terms of the development came from John Dean in terms of his coaching, working with us on a day-to-day basis. You know, you'll know Steve Foley. Steve Foley's, you know, it's absolute ledge. Steve Foley, I love him to bits, and he was a massive part of my career. And I know Craig Bellamy said the same. So we've both had the same era of coach that we look back on now and both say he was a massive part of it during our younger years of getting the best out of us. So as Kieron said, for me, the manager almost became irrelevant. I think if you've got a group of players who are good and are self-motivated, the manager doesn't need to say much. You go out there and let them do it. They'll give you the idea of what you want you to do. But if you've got the right players that are self-motivated to make decisions on the pitch first and foremost, I see nowadays when teams play about, you want them to work out problems on the pitch, problems they come up against. They set them in a system. If it's not working, a lot of players can't work out what to do. Whereas I think back in our era, and I know Kieron's the same, we took it upon ourselves, and players in the team took it upon ourselves to make those decisions on the pitch as how to play, to drop for 5 minutes, to push forward, to tighten up. All these kind of decisions were made by the players on the pitch, not necessarily the manager. So for me, good teams, it seems a weird thing to say, because you have to, look at the Klopps and the Peps nowadays are very different to the way the managers we played under. They're very much the coaches. I suppose you're more like the Steve Foleys, the John Deans. They're the managers now. But they let their players go out and they motivate them to go out and play, but they let the players on the pitch do it. And that's why those players are playing at Man City. That's why they're playing at Liverpool. Not because they're just technically the best players, because they work out problems the best on the pitch as well. And they do it themselves. Pep could sit on the bench. Klopp could sit on the bench and do nothing for the whole game and they would still win because they just got that mentality on the pitch of knowing what to do when to do it. And that for me makes a good manager. So I couldn't care less who the manager is of this team, to be honest, because those players on the pitch wouldn't listen anyway. We'd just do what we wanted to do.
Well, we'll stick with George just because of your strong argument, Kieron, at the beginning. Martin O'Neill went on to do great things after he left at Norwich, but he wasn't there long enough. And obviously Mike Walker fell out with Robert Chase and then left and came backwards. So I think came back again. So I think we'll stick with George for that, for his loyalty. I'm just going to go through the team. I've never recorded this also as an audio podcast, so I just suddenly thought actually it's all well and good putting a graphic up, but if people are sitting in their car or walking their dogs, they won't be able to hear it. So the team they won't be able to see it. So the team you came up with was Richard Wright in goal, your two fullbacks of Ian Calverhouse and Maurizio Taricco, your two centre halves, John Newsom and Mark Venus, and look at this midfield: Matt Holland, Jim Magilton, Kieron Dyer, and the fly in the ointment of the blue midfield is Darren Eadie, but I think well deserved. The forward line is going to, I think, have a lot of discussion on social media with Chris Sutton and Craig Bellamy and how quickly you crumbled, really, Kieron there. I think Jono's going to feel a bit harsh, but he's got it on the bench. He's on the bench with Ian Crook, and I don't know if we decided the third one, so I'm going to stick Mickey Stockwell down.
But what I'm saying, you say I'll take the brunt of it, and it's crazy in a way because as players, there's the supporters player of the year and there's the players player of the year. Players take more pride, and don't take it the wrong way to the fans, by being voted by their peers. Because we're there every day on the training pitch, in the games. We know really what is going on and who are the main fellows. So when he's telling me Craig Bellamy and Chris Sutton, I know. As much as I love David Johnson and Scoey, they're not as good as Craig Bellamy and Chris Sutton. And for fans of Ipswich who think these players, yes, you should have your icons in that. But I'm telling you now, I've played with Craig Bellamy. He is a lot better than David Johnson and James Scowcroft ever were. And that's not a knock on them. He was a great player.
I think
and the thing is as well, if you ask David Johnson, the same question. He would probably openly admit that Shearer, Sutton and Craig Bellamy had better careers than he probably did, or was a better player. That's not been derogatory to him. I don't compare myself to players I think I'm better than. There's players that are better than me. It's Kieron said, you know where your place fits in the game, and generally your career dictates that. And those two lads had unbelievable careers.
Well, David Johnson's not even the best player in his household.
I love it.
Good luck, Brendan.
That's a great answer. The last thing we've got to do is we've got to have a captain. Matt Holland's in the team, so we'll stick him down there. And I think
for me.
Yeah.
For me.
Well, it's always got to be the boring one in the team, isn't it? Matt Holland's boring as, so it's got to be him,
again, if I was a manager and I was to pick a captain out of him and Jim Magilton, I would pick Jim Magilton.
Yeah. I'll tell you what always makes a difference, the captain, right? And you'll probably vouch for this one, Kieron, as well. The guarantee, and Matt Holland was the PFA rep as well.
Yep.
There you go. That says it all. They always are. They're them type of people. Always wears black boots. Always does the right thing. Yeah,
exactly.
And that there is a need for that player in life, in football and in life. But that's great. I think with the 14 players that we've come up with and the George Burley, but neither of you seem to kind of really worry about that. I think it would cause a great deal of debate. I'd like to thank you both for coming on, but particularly first of all you, Darren. I really appreciate that you spending the time to come on to this podcast. I have tried to be objective and probably a bit too objective at some points, but I think that the cherry on the cake for me was that Jim was I don't think he'd be very happy that he was a late selection in the team, but he should have been the first name on there. But I'm pleased to have him in there, and I'm sure it will cause lots of debate. So thank you very much, and thank you, Kieron.
Where does that team come in the Premier League?
I'll tell you what, it wouldn't be bad, would it?
Just the centre half's worrying me a bit.
Yeah, that's it. That's my. That's
if Matt Holland and Jim are very disciplined and protection, then as a front,
bit pace.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, Bellamy, Dyer, Eadie, and Sutton. I mean, that's like Mane, Salah, Diaz. That's worth about 500 million now, isn't it? 500 million for that lot. It's been an absolute pleasure. Look, thanks for having me on. It's been great to reminisce, actually. And people, we always have that rivalry, but I miss it, and I wish it will come back as quick as possible. But hopefully it'll be a few years just yet, because we've gloated for the last 15? Is it been now? It's been a long time.
Too long, yeah. For me as a fan, it was great just having the derby matches. It was the greatest week or the worst week ever. It was the only time probably that I watched Anglian News and Look East, because you had the build up for it and stuff. And yeah, many a time I've gone to Carrow Road and been really, really happy, and other times I've gone there and been really, really glum. But it's the team that I love to, as any fan that you love to beat. But if you don't have a rival, I'd much, you got to have a rival in there, and Norwich City is our rival, so it's really good. Is that
your dream to go back in the club as a coach with the first team, or you happy at Leicester learning your trade at the moment, or?
I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I manage it with my brother-in-law Chris Wigger, so we have a great time, and I love that, someone to bounce off. I don't know. It's not something I've really considered. I'll see where it takes me. I miss it every single day, as you do. I miss the changing rooms. I miss being around those lads. But I think the success Norwich has had now over the last few years makes it very difficult for me to be able to step back in. I think if they were in lower leagues, it might be a bit easier to sort of get in and around the club and coaching roles and stuff like that. They've had such success. I don't think there's probably a way in that way. I'm going in as an ambassador again next year, so I'll be working at the club quite closely with them and working on their media side and doing all that. So look, I'm sure there's roles there for me, which I'd love to be part of. But ultimately, I think Norwich City have had such success over recent years. I'm way off that. Do you know what? The thing is with management as well, I think I'd love to manage Norwich, but if I want to manage Norwich, you want to be there forever, because I'm not someone who wants to be transient and keeps moving around. And if you get success, you're going to be there for a year or two. If you don't do well, you're going to be there for a year or two. And either one way, it's going to go one way or the other. You're going to be tarnish your reputation in terms of what you do, or you're going to be elevated to that God again. So, you know, it can go either way. And I'm quite happy with my career in terms of the way I played there. But you never say never. Do you know what I mean? If I got asked the question, of course I would. I'd love the club.
Have you had much dialogue with Stuart Webber, CEO at Norwich? Because obviously with Ipswich and the takeover, and Mark Ashton, the CEO's a big thing at Ipswich now. And when I look at CEOs, he's the benchmark, I think, Stuart Webber, of what he's done at Norwich. And like he was linked to Man United and peaked clubs like that. That's how good his success was. And how have you
I think if you look at, he's been great. Look, if you look at the way the club was when he came in and how he's remodeled it, and there's always the argument about staying in the Premier League, and we know how difficult that is. And the recruitment hasn't been great this season. It hasn't. The team's ended up worse than it was the last time in the Premier League. That's a whole other story. I think if you take that away from it and look at the infrastructure behind the football club now and the training ground, I think they're doing another phase on the training ground now, which is going to take them into the top 10 in the Premier League in terms of training ground.
Wow!
So it's just incredible what they're doing. So that will have longevity. You know, now it's about getting right on the pitch. And as a fan, they don't care where the lads train. I don't care where the lads train. I want to see them win on the pitch. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And when you get success, you want to grow that success, and it becomes very different. You know, Leicester's a good example of it. Leicester fans are always pretty happy. Then they won the Premier League, and now they're not happy because they're not competing at the top of the league. Fans' expectations change because of success, and rightly so. And Norwich have gone up and down the last few years, have had great success, but the fans now want to be able to compete in the Premier League. And I don't think it's just about staying in the Premier League. They want to look like they're competitive in it. And unfortunately, this season, they didn't. You know, they weren't. They were just the group of players they've got are just not good enough. And that's not being derogatory about them as people. I don't know them. It's just as a group, they've not been good enough to stay in the Premier League. And that comes down to technical ability. As I said before, I think there's a lot of young foreign lads have gone into the squad, expected to hit the ground running in the Premier League, and it won't happen. You know, but it'll soon get forgotten about. Have a good start in the Championship next year and get promoted again. Then we can think about doing things differently. So you have to learn lessons from it, and I'm sure Stuart Webber will do that.
Good. And last thing for me is I've really enjoyed it. I like the banter. Like I said, I respected you as a player. Even though we were rivals, we were teammates as well, which is a bit weird as well. But obviously, I'm unemployed at the moment, waiting for a liver transplant. Don't know when that's going to be. So we've come up with this idea that in the meantime, I'm going to be doing podcasts. I'm going to go through my long list of contacts. There'll be more to come. But also, obviously, when Leiston and the pre-season start, if you want me to pop along and do a session and help out or whatever in the meantime,
absolutely, mate.
Yeah, definitely. Because I know you've still got
mate.
Dave Williams, the
Ipswich. You're more than welcome. We'd love you to come in and say Lee Norfolk's one of our coaches who you know from the academy anyway, so it's a great lad. So, mate, you're always welcome. Love to have you come in and do some bits with the boys. It'd be our pleasure, without a doubt.
Brilliant.
I can pick up the cones at the end if you like, just to take part of that. So thank you both very much. It's been excellent, and look forward, Kieron, to putting together some other podcasts going forward. And thank you, Darren. Wish Leiston the best of luck next season, and Kieron, wish you the best of luck with your health and once you've got that sorted, the kickstarting on your career going forward. So thank you very much, both of you, for your time.
No problem. Cheers.
Pleasure.
Pal. Thank you.
See you later. Cheers.